Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast. All right, we're live today. We're joined by special guest, Mr. Hal Blood and Joe Kruse, and as always, Dan Infalt. So quick few notes before we get started here. One, there's a crazy windstorm going on at my place, so hopefully I don't lose power or internet. And second, we had a little bit of technical difficulties getting Hal and Joe on video, but they are here on audio, I believe. So Hal, Joe, how are you guys doing today?
Doing great, you?
Doing great. And
good. We're both here. Good.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, a little bit of hiccups getting here, but here we are. And I believe Dan, you were on Hal and Joe's Big Woods Bucks podcast not too long ago. So why don't you talk about that a little bit and how we all ended up here?
Yeah, we had a great conversation. Hal's a great hunter, and so's Joe. And I really like being on their podcast. I've always been a fan of Hal's, and just getting to know Joe a little bit too. And love the idea of having him on here and talking about some tracking. Not a lot of guys in this section of the country hear a lot from those guys, where they're very well known in the East. Most people know their name out here, but I don't think a lot of people heard much on their tracking techniques and stuff. And I think it would be great to expose them to our audience.
And real quick, Joe, we're getting a little bit of feedback, so I don't know if you got your phone close to the mic yet, but we're picking up a little bit of echo on that on your end.
Okay, no, I don't. I have it away from there, but let me see if I can adjust anything here on our end.
Sure. While you're looking at that, Uncle Lou, one of our show sponsors, Stealth Outdoors, wanted me to let everybody know that, and he had a saying here, I want to read it so I don't mess it up. Smart people buy straw hats in the winter, which is code for don't wait to get your gear until you need it. Get it ahead of time so you can get all your stuff outfitted. So head on over to Stealth Outdoors and place an order today. So we want to start out today, Joe, Hal, with why tracking. That's obviously a popular thing in the Northeast, and I'd like to know, is that something that come about culturally? Is it a deer density necessity thing? Give me your guys' take on why tracking is so popular in the Northeast.
I don't necessarily think it's a deer density thing, because tracking has been popular for, I don't know, pretty much forever. And it used to be, it's only really, Maine's probably like your states out there, like you have the North and you have the South, and the population centers are in the South, and the rural forest areas in the North. That's the way it is here as well, always has been. And historically, in Maine, there was very few deer in southern Maine, once the land got settled, it was all turned into farms, and there was no trees, so there was very little deer. Of course, they killed them off for food too. But the North Maine woods, the northern half of the state, was where the deer population, always thrived, because there was no roads back then to get in there. I mean, there was logging, and that's actually turned around now. Now northern Maine has a lot fewer deer than southern Maine, but tracking, as far as I know, there's been people that's been doing it forever, but I think it probably got a little more popular back in the 70s and 80s, when Larry Benoit started hunting over here, he kind of, I think, maybe put it on the map a little bit. He was from Vermont and was doing tracking over there, and then decided to hunt over in Maine. And I think that probably, I mean, a lot of people were doing it, but that probably put it on the map. There was some articles in, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream about him, and his boys at the time were doing quite a bit of tracking. But I think that's probably how it got well known. But lots of people have done it, and so I think it is traditional. And but now with the deer densities the way they are, it makes quite a bit of sense, because if you got snow, you can get after a buck. All you gotta do is follow his track. He's going to be somewhere if you keep following his track, right?
Sure. Yeah, and I kind of
Probably
Oh, sorry, Joe. I kind of draw a parallel to out west. Like, there's a lot. So I live in Montana. I don't know if you gentlemen know that, but I'm from Michigan originally, so I've been living out west about 5 years now, and there's a lot of areas that are big gameless, and I feel like it's kind of the same way in the North Woods. But instead of cutting a track out here, I got to drive around a glass to find something to hunt. So kind of a similarity there. Sorry, Joe. Go ahead with what you're going to say.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is I think also too here in the northern part of the state, what we call the big woods, is you don't pattern deer here like you do in other places. It's harder to pattern them to a food source or bedding areas or that sort of thing, because these bucks are the deer themselves are migratory. They migrate in the winter to wintering yards, which is different than deer down south. And the bucks up here, because of the density, have to travel long ways to find a doe sometimes. So just as a matter of a more efficient way to hunt them, I think tracking came to be.
Yeah. And I think these deer are a different creature anyways. I've hunted all across the country and in Canada too, Ontario and stuff. But these deer here travel a lot further, these bucks, than they do anywhere else I've ever hunted. They just roam big territories, and so they got a big territory, and usually even just getting around in their home range of their territory, it might take 3 or 4 days. So they're not coming and going anywhere. They're just making big circuits, and then as they get older, their territory increases in size, and they're just nomads, and they wander. That's kind of what I wrote about in my first book, was they are truly nomadic.
The other part of it too is, I think, with I enjoy stand hunting, I enjoy tracking, I enjoy all kinds. A guy like Hal says it all the time, you can't stand to sit. So I guess if you're a guy that can't stand to sit, that's the only way to go.
Right. Yeah, there's something to be said for that. Since I moved out west, I did a lot more spot and stalk hunting. Now I used to be pretty much strictly a tree stand hunter, and kind of gets in your blood moving around, and it's hard to go back to the tree stand after you've been hunting an active style.
Yeah, well, you can track them out there in Montana. I've done that out there.
Yeah, if it would snow anymore. I don't know what's going on. We don't get too much snow the last couple of seasons.
There's also, the allure of tracking is, it is one of those things that once it gets in your blood, you got to do it. And I think part of it is the story that the track tells. You learn so much about deer and their habits and where they go and what they're doing. A lot more so than sometimes when people are stand hunting. I know, like in Dan's situation, he understands and learns the deer and does his homework, but for a lot of guys, it's just sitting in a tree. You don't learn a whole lot that way.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Dan, I know
we just rotate through the same stands. When I was younger, I did a lot of tracking when I was young. Right about high school to just out of high school age. I shot a couple bucks. But what stopped me from doing it more. It's not that I don't like it or anything, but I would travel up to the Northwoods to do that in Wisconsin, far top of the state. And when I'd get on a track, I'd follow this deer, like say a mile or so, and I'd keep running into hunters and bait piles and angry people that I'm tracking. And another thing was, you'd be following a solo deer, but all of a sudden it would start leading into all kinds of tracks, and I'd get confused. You guys run into a lot of hunters there when you're tracking deer, or is that more of a hunter density problem out here?
I think it's your problem out there because, and there's places up north, around, there's certain areas that get hunted a lot more than others, just by virtue of there's a bigger population of hunters because there's more camps and it's not as far north. So in those places, but the people that hunt there end up running into other hunters. But up here, it's not quite as bad as that. I mean, I don't see very many hunters in the woods, but I particularly don't hunt or go to pick up a track if it's an area where there's access or roads or something, because I don't want to be around other hunters, and I very rarely see a hunter in the woods, let alone even a boot track in the woods. And I mean, I can go all day and all season and hardly ever see a boot track in the woods.
Yeah, for me, it got to the point where just like it had to be weekdays if I tracked. If I did it on weekends, we only got a week-long season, so everybody's in the woods during that 9 days. But during the week would be my best time to track because of the pressure on the weekends.
Yeah, the corn piles would definitely be a problem. We don't have baiting in Maine, so that's not.
We don't here either. It's illegal, but they do it. And all the tracks, they would all go to a bait pile eventually.
Yeah, that's not good because them bucks are going looking for the does, and it's actually changing because I hunted in the UP there a few times, and that's what would happen there. It was legal there, and I tracked a buck one day. I never saw a hunter, but I went by 5 different bait piles, and there was nobody on stand. There was a little box blind stands there, and nobody happened to be in them. It was a weekday, but it does really change the way a buck travels, for sure. It has to,
Yeah.
Well, one of the first questions I think a lot of people have is when you're looking at a track and especially as a new guy or an inexperienced tracker, how do you tell the difference between a buck and a doe, and how do you tell the difference between maybe an immature buck and a mature buck?
Joe's nodding to me.
Well,
yeah. So I've hunted out that way, and from hunting different places from Montana and even up in Ontario, the tracks out that way on average are not going to be as big as they are here. Maybe if you get up the extreme northern end up towards, the UP or over and towards Minnesota, maybe a little bit more, but because even here in southern Maine, the southern half of the state, the tracks are nowhere as near like they are up in northern Maine. And the only thing I can think of is it's because our deer it's that we have the northern borealis whitetail is what's the largest subspecies. And even though, you get those big over 200-pound bucks up in Saskatchewan and Ontario and all that, the feet aren't very big on them. So, but here they are. So and hunting out there a few times, there are some good tracks, good sized tracks. And I would say the big tracks I saw out your way would be, I call them 3x3, but they're never the same. They're always usually a half-inch longer than they are wide. But if you find a track that's 3 inches wide and 3.5 long out your way, you're into a big old mature buck for sure. Here, the biggest ones we get here are 4 by 4.5, and you'll never see bigger tracks anywhere than like that up in this country. But if you find one out there that's 3 by 3.5, I'm reasonably sure that buck is going to dress out over 200, because they will here. So that's what it is. And then as far as a buck and a doe, the buck's dew claws turn out perpendicular to the hoofs, and the does will be more in line. In other words, you'll see the hoof prints, and then behind them, a doe's dew claws are typically little slash marks, and you're only going to see a doe's when the snow gets a little deeper anyways, but they'll be right in line with the hoof prints. And those bucks, especially as they get older and mature, the dew claws will be perpendicular. So and then they'll be outside. A big one is going to be, the dew claws will set down wider than the hoof print. And then as they get older, they'll set back further as their feet and tendons get stretched out. They'll get an inch behind the toes, and then a long span would be almost 2 inches behind the hoof prints. So that's kind of basically what you'd be looking at.
Another quick thing to look at, and one of the things that jumps out to most guys that are looking for tracks up here, is just the width of the tracks. You know, when we always talk about the big bucks up here, it looks like a cross-country skier's going through the woods, because they're dragging their feet, number one, which the does, if you picture like a doe is kind of dainty, picking their feet up, walking, and the bucks just kind of slog through the woods and they drag their feet. But the width of the track, of the stride, you know, the two tracks is really the best telltale sign.
Are you talking about the distance between like the front left hoof and the front right hoof, like the across the chest distance? Is that what we're talking about?
Correct. Yeah, the chest is wider on the buck, so the wider, 8 to 10 inches wide.
I call that the stance. Yeah, 8 to 12 is really excessive, but 8, 10, even 12, if it's that wide between them, it's a good one. It's a mature buck. And the length of the stride, I don't go a lot by it. You can kind of tell a little bit. It might be a longer deer, which gives you the weight, but the same buck can have a 2-foot stride or a 3-foot stride, no matter, depending on how fast he's walking. So.
Well, obviously, guys, this tracking, it's going on in snow, and Dan, I know you had some questions about snow, so I don't pass those over to you.
Yeah, I was wondering what your preferred depth of snow is, and how old or how fresh the snow should be.
That's a good one.
3 inches.
Yeah, the young fellas. It's funny. When we're going to get some snow, or the young fellas in camp will say, "I hope we get a foot of snow tonight," and I'll say, "I hope we get 2 inches." Yeah, it's actually easier to track in less snow, because you don't have snow falling in the track. So the print's easier to see. It's easier walking on us, because you have flat country out here, but you start heading up these steep mountains in a foot of snow, and can wear on you, So 2 inches is enough to cover over the leaves good and make, like a solid white canvas that they're painting on.
Quiet it down too.
Quiets it down, because sometimes there'll be frozen leaves, and then you'll get the snow on it. You need enough snow to quiet it. And then if you get early wet snow, if you don't get enough of it and the leaves are sticking through, then it'll end up, the sun comes out, it melts pretty quick. But
and the drier snow is going to be quieter too. You start getting wet snow, sometimes it squeaks, and a nice 3 inches of powder, 4 inches of powder is pretty nice to track on.
Yeah, the problem with the wet snow sometimes, especially if it warms up during the day and the sun hits it, and it freezes at night. It's a crust, and then it's noisy the next day. So, and it's kind of ironic because, a lot of people think, you just go out and it's great tracking snow the whole season, but it's not. If we get a half a dozen days, we have a long season. We've got 4 weeks of rifle and a week of muzzleloader up north. And if you get a half a dozen really good snow days in that time, it's been a good season, So you got to take advantage of it when you have it.
Well, obviously, it sounds like a snow the night before you're going hunting in the 3-inch range is ideal. But what happens if you get 2 or 3 days after that snow? What factors, when you're looking at a track, help you age it? So let's say, telling the difference between a track that's a day old and was 3 days old right after the snow. What are you guys looking for specifically in the track?
How much time you got?
We got all the time. I think that's why people are tuning in. That's what they want to hear.
Yeah. Well, I teach my deer clinics out here. I'm doing them now. I got 5 weekends in a row, 3-day weekends. And that's when I get into the tracking section on that clinic I teach. The aging the tracks is actually the most difficult part of tracking. See, some people think it's, being able to walk fast or be able to walk up the hills or be able to sort the track. That's minor compared to aging the track, because if you start out, if you don't know the difference between a 3-day or a 2-day old track and an 8-hour-old track, you're going to have a big problem, because you're not even really getting started right in the morning, So the only way you can put it in a nutshell, and for people to practice that, is the easiest way I can explain it is a track, as soon as it's made, whether it's a deer, a dog, or your track, it's changing immediately, and it's either freezing / evaporating, or it's melting. So it's above 32, it's melting. If it's below 32, it's freezing, and they go in the extremes from there. So the warmer it gets, the quicker it melts. The colder it gets, the quicker it evaporates. Like if you put an ice cube in your freezer, in your ice tray, if you don't take any out for a week, they're about 2/3 the size, and if you leave them for a couple of 3 weeks, they're way down low. So if it can melt, if ice evaporates in the freezer, snowflakes are going to evaporate a lot quicker. And that's the only way I can explain it. But so you have to look not so much at the print as the edge of the track, the top edge where the hoof breaks that top edge of the snow, whether it's a wet snow or a powder snow, it doesn't matter. The edge of that snow is going to change immediately. You won't notice it immediately, but it'll start changing. So it's easy enough. If you can tell the difference between just anything made in the night, you got your start for the day if it's made in the night. Because if it goes through one day, even in a cloudy day, just the ambient light changes the track a lot. And the only way I explain is it's when it's fresh or made in the night, it's crispy looking, real crisp around that edge. And if it's gone through a day, it's rounded over. And the dust kicked out in front is rounded over. And you just have to go out and practice it when you get snow, and you can do it in the winter or do it anytime, and make tracks and then check them every few hours and see what happens.
It's definitely the most challenging part, like Hal said, and the toughest part to get down. And I do a lot of comparing my track on the track. You make a track, you see what's falling, because there is so many factors that you have to put together, which is part of the fun of the game. But certainly is the most challenging part.
Yeah. And Could you relate that to what you call wedgies? Because I think that'd be a good point here.
Yeah.
Wedgies.
Yeah.
Wedgies is the piece of mud that sticks between their toes and flops out. We'd always measure those.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with those tracks. That sharp cut, you can tell if it's fresh, but it's hard to explain. And another thing that I would look at is that like blowout from it. If it sits overnight, those blowouts almost always stick to the snow. You know, where if it's fresh, those blowouts, if you take a little stick and you try moving them, they roll around on the snow. They don't have time to stick if they're fresh. But how old of a track will you follow?
I take anything made in the night.
So you won't take a day-old track or a 2-day-old track? He's too far ahead?
Only if it's the first week of the season, the first week of November, or muzzleloader season. That's when they're not traveling as much.
Okay.
Yeah, if you got on a buck the end of the second week, that was a day old, he might be 20 miles away.
You're lucky to catch him in one day. If you're on one 8 hours old, you're lucky to catch that one. He's got to stop and do something before you're going to catch up to him. And they might.
The next day, I mean, will you go back to where you left off in the morning, or is he too far ahead overnight?
Again, it depends if it's. I only do that, and I've done it a couple times. I've killed a couple of bucks that way, but it's either early or late. When I shot a few years ago, I called him Brutus at Films on YouTube. That was a 2-day-old track. No, it wasn't 2 days when I got on it, but I tracked him for 2 days. I got on it. It was pretty fresh. Jumped him, fired at him, I think, once or twice that day. Once, I guess. And then I got back on him in the morning because I knew he was real tired. He just wasn't going anywhere. He just get ahead, and he'd lay down his track, and I figured I'd get him anyways, and I did. I got him the second day. And then I shot one, quite a while back at the first week of the season. All I had, I'd already tracked a couple bucks into Canada, and I found one that was 2 days old, and it was real big, and I said, well, it was headed back down towards where I'd come from, and I hadn't seen it. I said, well, I'll try it. And I caught up. I must have got on it later in his first night, because within a mile, I'd got to where it was, only one night old. And then within another mile, I killed him. But that was the first week before there's any rut activity, any does coming in or anything.
Okay, I got a couple follow-up questions on the track. So let's say you find a track that you're going to take up, something that was made during the night, and it looks fresh. I think a lot of people have a question. How do you keep it? And maybe it's not as big of an issue because of the density, but how do you keep a track straight when it comes into an area with other deer and an area starts getting tracked up? Do you have any tips to stay on the track that you began on?
Persistence. It really, when you're young and you're first starting out, that's one of the easiest places to give up on. You got this great track, and he's all alone when you pick it up, and the next thing you know, he's in what we call a barnyard, where there's a pile of deer around. He came into a group of does. Maybe there was a doe in heat, and there's bucks running around, chasing and everything else. I mean, it's nearly impossible. So the quickest and easiest way, if you can't sort it out, is to do a big loop and circle around. And if you're on a buck that is a much bigger track than the other ones, that is something that comes with, when you're tracking, is that track, if you're on it for a couple hours, it's imprinted in your mind, and you can follow it. You can just glance down and see it and pick it apart from other tracks. So if you lose that track and a bunch of other deer tracks, you just do a big loop around until you pick up, because they went out of there, right? So eventually, if you keep at it, you can pick it up again.
The key really is to pick up, is to take the tracks that are, like the bigger size tracks for your area. Then there's less of those to get confused with. And not only do you look at the print, the bucks walk differently. Like we talked about, some will drag their feet. The older bucks drag their feet constantly. And then the younger bucks don't drag them much. But they all usually, any buck that's 3 years old is going to drag somewhat, like a little bit coming out of his track. Every track's going to drag a little bit out. But so if you take your bigger ones in the area, there'll be less of them to sort through. But like Joe said, you have to circle. If you waste all the time chasing the track around in a mess of them, that buck is gaining on you. You're never going to catch him doing that. You just have to make a circle one way or the other and just pick up the first one that looks like the one that went in, make sure it's the same age, and it goes out. It might come back in, but that's all you can do. You just circle them. And it's easy. It's not hard. You just keep all the tracks on one side of you until you find that big one coming out, and then just get on it and keep going.
It's usually up here. It's not a matter of, you don't have big, vast areas full of a lot of deer tracks. I mean, down in southern Maine you do, but up in our area, once you get out of that core area, which might be a half an acre, 2 acres, whatever it is, where there's all that deer activity, once you get outside of that activity, they're sparse and you can pick them up again, just, traveling.
Usually when those bucks travel, especially when the rut starts, and I think your season out there is pretty much during your rut, is it? Or is it after, or late in the rut?
In Wisconsin, it's after rut.
Okay. So if it's after the rut, those bigger bucks, they're still going to be looking for that last odd doe that hasn't been bred. And the other ones are probably just going to be looking to put the feed bag on to get back in shape for the winter, which those are the easier ones to track because they don't usually go that far. So if you see them wandering around and feeding, you better slow down. You'll be catching them here. Like I said, it is our muzzleloader season, and then the first week in November they're not moving that much. But after that, they're traveling from doe to doe to doe to doe all day. That's what they do, and they don't stop until they find one, and one that's ready. So you just got to be prepared to walk. That's all.
It sounds like you've had some experiences where you run into a buck after a mile and some after several miles. So when you're on the track itself, I've read about this a little bit. It'd be helpful for the audience. What can clue you in that you're getting close to that buck by the track itself, or maybe the terrain, or any clues?
Well, normally the easiest way to tell is if they start wandering and feeding, they're ready to lay down. And again, sometimes that's a function of early and late, because usually during the rut, they munch along as they go. They nip a little here and there. But anytime you see one, and I think this will probably out your way be more true since it's after the rut, is as soon as a buck, if you get on him and he's just walking along and getting somewhere, and then he starts to feed, he's wandering over and feeding on some old man's beard or ferns or whatever you have for feed. Once they start feeding, they're probably not too far away, and that's when you got to start creeping and looking.
I'm always looking for, Hal and I got on a track a number of years ago. We were hunting together, and I think we went 13 miles, and the deer never stopped. So I'm always just looking for any time the deer stop, and whether he's making a scrape or making a rub, whether he comes into another group of deer, anything that slows them down. So you're constantly keeping in your mind, the time and what time he might be taking. Like Hal said, the number one thing is if they're stopping to feed and then, lay down, because they're obviously eating up the most time bedding, but anytime they stop is and do anything is good, just because you're making up time on them.
So I would imagine, you walk fast when they're walking hard, and you slow down when they slow down.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, and because you can't walk as fast as a buck. I don't care if you hustle along just as fast you can shuffle. You're not walking as fast as a buck is. So he's got to do something to make you gain some time. So it's either making a rub, making a scrape, chasing some does, getting something to eat, whatever it is. And then, like Joe said, then you kind of, everything he does, you kind of just say, okay, I gained 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes. If he laid down, you might have gained anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 hours if he laid down, depending on, again, the time of the year. So that's how you're going to gain. But the only way you can do that is when you get on a track in the morning, just put your head down and go, and don't worry about making noise. Don't worry about, you want to keep your eyes up ahead because you can always see another deer, but just go until the track tells you what he's doing. You're just living his life anyways when you get on the track. He's written his life in the snow, and you just got to interpret it and react to it.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about bedding. So when you come up to a bed and the track, how do you look at that bed and decipher if you either spooked the deer and didn't see it, or if that bed was maybe an hour, 5 hours old? What are you looking at to interpret the age there?
But the first thing is what you just mentioned. You're looking to see if there was running tracks going out of it, or if it just got up and walked away. So that's the first thing you're going to look for, right? And obviously, if you spooked it, it's a whole different game. If he jumped and ran, but if he got up, usually you'll see tracks around where he milled around a little bit and then walked away. Sometimes they'll bed down and they don't like that spot, and they'll get up and bed down 50 yards away. And while you're sitting there looking at that bed, he's blowing at you and taking off. But as far as how old the bed is, the first, you feel it and see if it's frozen or not, how fresh the bed itself seems.
It's just like the track. The bed's either going to be, if it's warmer, it's going to be melted out where he laid there. If it's cold, it's going to be frozen after he gets up and walks away. That the heat from his body has turned the powder into damp snow, and that's going to freeze. And if it's just barely scun over or it's froze right to the bottom, can help you determine how long ago he got up. If you're lucky, he just got up and you missed him by 10 minutes, because he may be on his feet, and that's when you're going to get your chance.
So when I tracked deer, I noticed that my first interaction with those deer was my best chance of killing it. Once they were knew they were being followed, the problem I would have would be when they would bed up, which ours would bed up more than what you're explaining, probably because we weren't hunting rut. But they would J-hook into a bed and force you to walk past them and watch you. And I'm wondering if there's anything you do to combat that. Do you walk right on the deer track? Do you get off of the track? Or do you not have that problem at all?
Well, I don't know what you mean about a J-hook, but they usually always go off to one way or the other when they're going to bed down, because they want to watch their back track. And since you have the wolves out there, I'm sure that's even more prevalent, because, we've got the coyotes, and they're always, looking to see if something's falling like that. But sometimes they lay down within sight of where they turned, and sometimes they don't. It's just a chance you take. And so if they start to feed, sometimes when you see them start to feed, it's too late, because they've already seen you because they laid that close. And other times they'll go up over a ridge and lay down, and they're going to look and see if something comes up the ridge on their track. But I think out your way where it's a little flatter, it's probably, that's why you're saying they loop around. But they're watching any way they do it, they're watching their back track to see us follow them. So, but yeah, that's a common thing here. So that's why when I started learning myself back in the 80s, I would jump one and keep after it, and I'd see where he'd stop and pace around waiting for something to come along. And that was me. Then he'd keep running. But I started waiting and letting him settle down and forget about something being behind him. And that was kind of like the magic thing. So now I pretty much every time I jump one, I just wait a half an hour. They go off and they stand around. And if you don't come along, they just forget about you.
As simple as that is, it makes a lot of sense. You just don't think about it. A wolf would have ran right after them, and they're waiting to watch for that.
Yeah, that's what they do, because a lot of these bucks, they run usually. It's not because they think necessarily something's after them. They might just see movement, or they even hear something, and they're just going to get up and get out of the way where they're ready to run away if they need to. And they just wait. And if nothing comes along, sometimes they lay right back down, and other times they decide they're on their feet. They're going to just go about their business again and go on a walkabout. But if you wait a half an hour, that gives them that time. And I've killed way more the second time than I ever have the first time.
And the other thing too is utilizing things like a grunt. If you jump them up, if they don't really make you out or they don't know what you are, the grunt tubes killed a lot of bucks coming back to check it out.
Yep, grunt or bleat, either one. But if I always, my first reaction, if I see one go or hear one go and I can't get a shot at it, I snort first, just one long snort, and usually they'll just say, "Oh, I saw another deer," or whatever. I heard another deer, and they'll go over there and wait. Sometimes they'll snort back at you.
Yeah, that reminds me, like out here, when we go in to hunt the way I hunt, just say bow hunting, when I go in, a lot of times when we jump bucks, we have a technique we call bump and dump, where if you bump these bucks, especially in rut, if you just stay still and let them run off, and you just get up in a tree, a lot of times they come creeping back to the same bedding area, thinking you just passed through, or maybe, like you said, not even know where you were, but they come back a lot. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'd like to get your guys' opinions on the wind, and two things. First, how do you think these bucks that you're tracking are using the wind in the terrain? And then second, how are you as the hunter taking the wind into account? Are you just staying on the track no matter what, or are you ever trying to loop around to get a wind advantage if you think you're getting close to maybe where they're bedded down? So how's the deer using the wind, and how are you?
Go ahead, Joe.
Wind, you really can't pay attention to the wind because you're on the track, and Hal, I think, is more from the way I've heard him relate it over the years. He usually always stays on the track. I have, I will get off the track and loop around if I have a good idea where the deer is going, try to cut them off, especially if they know that I'm behind them. But as far as the wind itself, you feel fortunate when it's in your favor and the buck is going into it. But we don't use any kind of scent control or anything like that. We just stay on the track and try to catch them at the right time.
Yeah, you can't hear, and it might be a function of, because we've got a lot of terrain, mountains, ridges, and all of that. The wind blows 4 directions like every minute anyways. So you could never really hunt into the wind. And quite frankly, I've tracked lots of bucks that they'll put the wind in their back and they know you're behind them. But here, like I said, that these deer aren't pressured, especially by people. You know what I mean? If they're pressured at all, it's from predators. But they don't seem to mind you behind them because you're not chasing them. You're not pushing them like a coyote or a wolf would. So I can see it written right in the track. I'm behind them, and they're walking along, and then once in a while you'll see where they take 2 or 3 jumps, and then they'll walk a little bit faster. And I know they could smell that I got a little too close for comfort for them, and they just moved it out a little bit. But they never seem to run off and just bolt and go. And I just stay on them because eventually they're going to run out of the wind behind their back. It's either going to change or they're going to change direction. And you got to keep going. You can't give up on a buck for all these reasons. You just got to stay on them. And I don't, like Joe said, sometimes I've looped before and made it work, but I like to stay on the track because as soon as you leave the track, you don't know what the buck did anymore. You're leaving everything to chance. I'd rather know he stopped and fed, or he chased a doe, or he laid down and got up and went again. See, if I don't stay on the track, I lose that information. I'd rather work with the information that he's telling me.
So sometimes, like there was 2 of us, Rick and I were hunting together this year, tracking a buck, and we were on the track all day, and he kept on doing what you talked about earlier, where he would get off to the side and he just bed down, and he was always at a vantage point where he was watching his backtrack, and he did that 3 or 4 times, and we left the track to try and catch him messing up that way, where we might catch him bedded down where he didn't see us. But it's one of those things that it all depends on the situation.
They're crafty.
Is it an advantage to have 2 hunters and have one concentrating on the deer ahead and one concentrating on the track?
Yep. It's both. It's an advantage in the respect that you've got a set of eyes that's just looking forward, and especially if it's a good set of eyes, obviously it's really helpful. And the guy that's following the track can just concentrate on that, which really only comes into play when you have to work it out. Typically, when you're following a track, if it's just a lone buck, you really don't have to look down much. You can look down every, 6 or 8 of your steps or whatever. So you got to be looking up, all the time. But with 2 people is also double the movement and noise. So that comes into play.
Yeah, I tell people, because I've guided most of my life, and when you have 2 people on a track, whether it's another hunter, a client, a cameraman, or something, it's not twice as hard to kill one that way. It's 4 times as hard. Now I'm saying that to mean like I would be tracking and trying to show somebody a buck to shoot. It's 4 times harder than doing it myself. Yeah. But if you're 2 of yous working together, I'm sure it's not 4 times harder, but it is twice as hard.
We want to talk about the gear some too, but before we do that, while we're talking about jumping bucks and shooting at bucks, how often are you shooting at a buck that's either bedded, standing, or running? And then I'm sure this varies wildly, but what's the average shot distance? I mean, are you shooting a lot of these deer 20, 30, 40 yards, 100 yards? What's that look like?
I've never shot one beyond 120 paces. And I've hunted in Ontario where there was clear cuts. I've hunted all different kinds of places, and that's the furthest buck I've ever shot. I've shot a couple others, maybe 100, but most of mine are, if I say an average shot, would be 20 to 50 yards in there, so maybe 30's the average or something.
Pretty tight.
35, then. Something. Yeah. It's usually a close encounter, and that's because, especially the old bucks like the ones I'm after, they spend a lot of their time traveling, and when they stop, they're going to be in cover. They're not going to be out in the open hardwoods laying around saying, shoot me,
Sure.
They're going to be in more cover,
I would say, I know Hal's done it quite a few times. I know a lot of guys that have shot him in their bed. I've never shot one in its bed yet, which is kind of the ultimate thing that everyone likes to do, but I would say it's a 50-50 between catching a deer just walking or not knowing you're there, and one that's running that you've spooked or whatever.
Yeah, it's like I said, I've shot a lot in their bed, and I've shot a lot getting out of their bed, and either way, it's a good feeling when you accomplish that because you've got them the first time. But I have never kept track of the amount of times. But if I can get a shot when he's getting out of his bed at first takeoff, as long as I don't hit a tree or a twig, he's probably going to get it. But that all comes with practice too. If you're going to take running shots, a lot of people they think are running shots unethical and all that, but it's no more unethical than somebody that can shoot running shots and is good at it. It isn't any different than somebody that can practice out to 300, 400, 500 yards and drive tacks at that distance. They're confident what they're doing, and that's it. I've never wounded. I've shot it. I can't even count how many deer I've shot running. I've never wounded one or had one get away. They're usually within 50 yards. Sometimes they drop where they're at or take a couple of jumps. You just have to you owe it to the animal to practice no matter how you shoot. If you're long range or running shots, you just, you want to get good at what you're doing.
Now, the caveat to that is that's when you're tracking and you have snow. Without snow, it's a whole different game in my eyes. But you want to get one into him when he's running. You can't be super fussy, obviously, on exactly where you're going to hit when it's running. You try to get the best shot you can, but when you have snow, a shot where a deer might run off and die and you never find them, you're going to find them on snow.
Yeah, and even if you did get a bad shot with the snow, you're eventually going to catch up to a wounded deer.
Yeah, you caught up to him before he got wounded.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're guys, if you got an extra minute here, we usually like to do some Q&A from the audience. We got some questions here, but before we do that, let's give a shout out to, if people want to learn more about this style, you guys have a website and a podcast, right? bigwoodsbucks.com. And where else could people find you on social media?
The YouTube channel is a Big Woods Bucks YouTube channel.
Facebook page. There's a Facebook page and a Facebook group, both.
Instagram. All the typical social medias, and on any of the podcast platforms is the Big Woods Bucks podcast.
Yeah, the website's got, the stuff our business is a lot about education. We like to entertain people with our films and all that, podcasts, but it's education. We like to educate the people to get them to learn. So we got a few books. I've written 2, and Mark Shreen's got 1. Still got a few DVDs, and all the other stuff that goes along with it, plus a line of the hunting clothes. So.
Great. So if people are interested in this style, you can check out Big Woods Bucks at the YouTube channel or the website. And then, Joe, when I was doing some research for this episode, I believe you're involved and or the owner of something called the Lake Parlin Lodge. Could you talk to us about that real quick?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Lake Parlin Lodge. It's a lodge and cabins that my wife and I own here just south of Jackman. And we're right now seasonal in the winter. It's mostly snowmobiling, but our big draw is moose and deer season. We have a really good moose hunt here in Maine. It's a lottery hunt, although we do have lodge tags available as well, which are basically, if you get with a outfitters get these lodge tags, and you can get with the outfitter and buy the tag without going in the lottery. But anyway, we have a great moose season and deer season that we run out of the lodge. Big Woods Outfitters, we run out of there. And in the summertime, we're just basically the cabins on the lake we rent. We do weddings and that sort of thing.
That's awesome. I think I read you're a float plane pilot too, right? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I am. We sold the plane a couple of years ago, and I'm hankering to get another one. So hopefully we'll be back in the seat again soon.
Yeah. Well, when we were scheduling this episode, I was out shed hunting, so I wasn't able to answer Joe. And then Joe sent me some pictures of some moose sheds. I think those go for good money. You might be able to sell a couple of those off, buy yourself a new plane.
It might be part of the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the shed hunting thing's turned into quite a thing, I guess, nationwide, but here locally it's crazy. It's just completely changed from when we all started shed hunting.
Especially when I started.
Yeah. Hal had a good jump on me with it.
Yeah. Oh, guys, I lied. One more question, and this is something from the chat and something that Dan and I planned on asking, and I skipped over. Talk to us about the equipment and specifically the rifle and the optics. What do you guys run, and why do you like? Why have you settled on what you're using?
I'll go first because Hal's going to finish with the traditional. The traditional answer, which works well for him. But I run a couple different guns. Pump Remingtons are like the gun of choice in the Northeast. 7600s and 760s. They have been for a long time, especially in carbine. They're easy to carry. They handle great. They're accurate, reliable. I've tried peeps, but I run a scope, which can tend to be a problem in fresh snow. It is the reason that a lot of guys run peeps, but because of eyesight and different issues, scopes are just better for some guys. You're just more used to them. But one of the trends that we're seeing, and something I'm going to try this year, is going to a red dot. You lose you don't have all the issues with the snow because it just falls off with a lot of the red dot sights. The glass is flush on the end, so the snow doesn't gather on it. You can pull it up. It's quick acquisition. So that's something new I'm trying, but I've hunted with the pumps. I've got a Browning long track semi-auto that I hunt with. Hunted with a lever gun last year. So I changed it up a little bit. I'm going to hand it over to Hal now.
These young guys are always trying new things, The old guys use what works for them, And I don't try to convince anybody of any particular gun. I just tell people, whatever you settle on, if you like a lever action, if you like a pump, semi, bolt, whatever you use, that's what you should use instead of switching up guns unless they have the same safety. Because I've seen it too many times guiding over the years. They bring two guns and one's a bolt action with a tang safety. Then they got a pump gun with a cross bolt safety. If you're doing that, it can cost you because you don't have the muscle memory in your gun. Your gun has to be to hunt this way, where you get quick shots in the thick stuff. You got to be able to get a shot off quick. And if you're thinking about which safety you got today, it's a lot harder to do that. And I like the peep sights just because you never have to worry them being, you can get snow in it, especially wet snow or something when you get going through the brush, but you just blow it out. As soon as I come out from under a tree that's covered with snow, I just look at it. If there's snow in the peep, I just blow it out and keep going. And it's fast. A lot of people don't understand a peep sight. They think you're trying to line something up, and you're not really. You're looking through the hole and you're putting the bead on it, and that's all you got to think about is getting the bead on the deer where you want to hit and go from there.
Yeah, more like shooting a shotgun than a typical rifle sight, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's quick and it's quick and it's fast, and if you practice with that, it's easy and it's deadly.
The other advantage, and one of the reasons I like the scope, is just for the little bit of magnification if you need it. If you're trying to look at something and see what it is. I also carry a small pair of binoculars, either in a case or underneath my jacket in the front where I can get to it quickly.
Yeah, I carry binoculars too because if you have a scope, you can pick things out that's off in the distance. You see some brown or whatever. But I carry binoculars. I've got them on one of those harnesses inside my jacket. And probably the other thing and I think Wisconsin's pretty wet too. They got them tag all the swamps, but I wear rubber boots, always have. I wear the, like 18-inch rubber boots and wool clothes. Wool's really, if you're tracking, I know if you're sitting in a stand, you don't need that kind of stuff. You can use whatever's comfortable, but if you're tracking and it's come time to close the deal and stuff, you're not going to do it with all the man-made synthetic materials. It's just not quiet enough. Wool is deadly quiet, whether it's warm when it's wet. There's a lot of good features of wool, and if you look at all the old time pictures of the old timers, go back from the turn of the century, they all had wool on. The other stuff didn't come about until, I don't know, probably started in the 80s or something, but 90s. But wool really there's no substitute for it to try to be in quiet when you're getting in close. I'm pretty much sure you're not going to, if you got noisy clothes on, you're not going to shoot a buck in his bed at 20 yards,
Yeah, no, that's a big part of how Dan hunts too, and what we talk about a lot is, and we did lose Dan for a minute, so we're going to try to get him back on, but if not, well, I'll just run through the questions here. So, but yeah, the silencing, and that's one of our show sponsors, Stealth Outdoors. They make an adhesive silencing material that we put on our tree stands and our bows and camera arms and all that stuff. So, but hey, I want to thank both of you guys for coming on. We're going to jump over into the Q&A now, and then while we're doing that, while you guys are answering, I'll try to get Dan back on here. So I think he said he was having a storm in his area today too. So all the issues today, but member Wooly says, what is Hal's favorite sandwich? So Joe, why don't you answer too? That's a unique one.
Meatloaf. My God, we're going to get t-shirts made. It's that time for a sandwich, because Hal's partial is meatloaf sandwich, but it's like a 5-pound lead in my stomach after I eat it. So I stick with peanut butter and fluff.
Yeah. He'll learn peanut butter and fluff don't stick with you. You got to have your protein.
That's right.
Yeah.
Meatloaf sandwich. A hearty sandwich.
Yeah, my honey's got a special meatloaf that she makes up, and we have it every week here at the lodge. So, and then the girls make enough so we don't eat ham and cheese sandwiches. We eat whatever meat's cooking, we're eating it. So we have a variety. Oh, and I'll give a shout out too. We've got a few openings left for the first week and Thanksgiving week here, if anybody wants to come out and join us and see how it's done. It's the American Plan Unguided, and
awesome.
We'll show people where to go.
That's super cool. Rich Naples says, I'm in New York. We haven't seen much snow these past few winters. What is your strategy when there's no snow?
Pray for snow. Yeah, I mean it's up here. It's more or less, we still go out and well, I take that back. If we're not guiding, we're going to get chores done that we're not going to get done otherwise. So when it snows, we can go. But if you're guiding and you have to go out, you're just hunting areas. You're still hunting. If it's raining out, I'd rather it be raining than not if there's no snow, because then you can still hunt a little more effectively. But up in this neck of the woods, it's quite a bit tougher when you don't have snow.
Yeah, but we have a good deer population. even the weeks we don't have snow at the lodge, the guys manage to see quite a few deer and shoot a few. But I personally still hunt. I call it, my still hunting is really my scouting, because I've got to the point where I just really want to shoot one track, and I don't really want to shoot one any other way. So I take my gun for a walk, or if I take my grandson or something, we'll still hunt in the places where the bucks travel. I'll get down, look at where my signpost rubs are, but you just have to, you got to keep at it. You're not going to shoot one out in the truck or back at camp. So, and that's when most people, they get discouraged, but it only takes a second to kill one if you're out there.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. No matter where you're at or what style you're using, lots of people's seasons have changed at an instant. And like you said, Hal, you got to be out there for that to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Mike asked, what's the largest body buck each of you have killed or seen? I guess it'd be hard to tell a weight from seeing it, but let's go with killed. And do you guys measure live weight or field dressed? What's the largest?
We do field dressed, and field dressed here means everything's out, heart, lungs, liver, everything. Some people go by, they just take the paunch out and the heart and lungs stays in. But that's in Maine, we have that. It started a long time ago. They call it the Biggest Bucks in Maine Club, and that's a buck that's dressed. The dress weight is 200 pounds or more. You get like a shoulder patch or whatever for that, but that's everything out of them. So
yeah, that's a large animal for sure.
Yeah, my biggest ones, I shot one in Ontario that dressed 280. My biggest one in Maine is dressed 260.
Holy cow. Yeah, huge deer.
Yeah, those are giants. My biggest in Maine is 225, and one in Saskatchewan, I think, was around 230.
Yeah, also a giant. Yeah, Saskatchewan grows them pretty big too. I don't know if they're as big as the Borealis, but they get some stout deer up there for sure.
I just never really count that one because it wasn't tracking.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like certain guys, right? Certain ways it's cheating, even if it's not, right? It's illegal. But everybody's got their preference.
It's fun. Don't get me wrong. I love it. I don't have any problem with it at all. I enjoyed it, but it's just different. You take a lot more pride in the weight here when you're tracking.
Oh yeah, get to be a purist in certain things too. I joke around like I've got an antelope out here with a rifle, and then I've shot two with a bow, and I kind of say the same thing about the one with the rifle. That doesn't really count. Brian Grigg says, how often do you walk up to deer bedded?
Deer or bucks? You mean tracking?
The question says deer, so maybe answer both. If you're on a single track, how often do you sneak up on a bedded buck, and how often on a buck track do you come across does, I guess? Probably the does would be more. Huh?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, I've never shot a buck that I was tracking in his bed, but I've seen plenty of does bedded and small bucks. But, it might be 75 yards away across Little Valley or something. Not necessarily up close and personal, but.
Yeah, you're more likely to, walk up on a young buck, like a yearling buck or something in the woods than you are an older buck or even a 3-year-old buck, because they're always watching their backtrack. So it's not easy to just walk up on one. You usually got to be pretty sneaky when you're tracking to even see one laying down,
Well, like you said,
now if they were asking about moose, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I think, Hal, you talked about it earlier. It seems like those older bucks, and we talk about this a lot when we're looking for bedding areas in the Midwest. It seems like they tend to bed in more educated areas where it's much harder to sneak up on them in general.
Well, they didn't get big and old for being stupid.
Right. Next question's from Paul Pereira. Says, how do you tell the general direction the deer is going? How do you tell whether it's a group of deer, a single buck, or single doe walking in circles, getting ready to bed down? And he says, I'm a novice. So maybe think back to your early days of tracking. How are you sorting out? And I think in your area, I'm broad strokes here, but there's less deer, so it's probably a little easier to keep track straight. But in the Midwest, a lot of times you run into what you guys call the barnyard. So how are you picking those apart, especially when you're a novice tracker?
Well, if you're if you're a novice, you might probably not after the biggest buck in the woods. But when you are, he's by himself until he finds a doe. He's not usually hanging around with any other deer. I mean, his track might end up in some other ones, but like I said, you just have to go by the size of the tracks. And one tip, if you want to know, like if there's several deer together, like you see small tracks and big tracks, if a buck is following a doe, his track is going to be in the smaller track. In other words, the bigger track will be in the smaller track. It might be a doe with her fawn and then a buck following them. But if you see the big track in the lead and smaller tracks behind it, it's most likely a doe with either a yearling. Sometimes they have a yearling doe with them and a new doe, a new fawn, this year's 6-month-old. So those smaller tracks will be behind, so you'll know that's does.
The other thing too is, novice hunter isn't going to be as selective about the size of the track, so he might be following a big doe track. And one of the telltale things that you'll notice is when they urinate, the doe is going to be straight down in a hole in the same exact spot, where a buck is going to be kind of dribbled around all over the place.
Oh, that's a good tip. Yeah, especially when you're getting started.
Right. Yeah, because all you got to do is follow doe around all day. You learn.
Yeah. Well, if you're
hard way.
And if you're a novice, I tell people that are new at it, don't worry about the tracks. Follow some tracks and just to see if you can see them. Then you'll know what they are. If you can be sneaky enough to even sneak up on a doe, you're getting there. You got some good practice going on.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Shifting gears here, we got a question from Mike. He says, ask about chewing cud, and if you think that causes bucks to bed, maybe they won't chew it while they're walking. Any observations there?
I don't know if they'll chew it while they're walking or not, but they can eat quite a bit and keep walking. We naturally think as soon as the does do that, they'll feed around, then they'll lay down and chew their cuds. But I don't think they have to chew their cud till they want to anyways, because like I said, I followed them for a long way and watched them, grab a little here, grab a little there for, several hours. And then once they do decide to lay down, that's when they're going to start chewing their cud and digesting.
Then we'll do one more here, and we did lose Dan. So Dan had a big thunderstorm going through his area. He said his internet's out, so he apologizes. He's not on for the end here, but he wanted to say thanks to both of you guys for coming on. Really appreciate it. And this is obviously a style of hunting that is kind of unique to the big woods in your area, and you guys are clearly experts in it. So appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your knowledge with our audience.
Yeah, our pleasure. Having fun.
And last question here for today. Alonzo says, do you use, well, you talked about using calls. So he says, do you use calls much when tracking? And I know you talked about either grunting or snorting. You got a favorite grunt call? And then maybe give, a situation or an example, like you guys were talking about, when would be like the ideal time to use that call?
That I use the extinguisher. Just I found it's a nice call that you can change the tones on. But to me, a grunt call is so important. If I forget it and I'm, away from the truck, I'm walking back and getting it. If it's something I forget, or if I walk out of the house or whatever. I mean, it's just an important tool for me. but I'll use, if you jump a deer, you're tracking him and you jump him from his bed and you don't get a look at him, but you hear him go, always pulling the grunt out right away and grunting. I used one a couple years ago, where the buck that I shot was tracking him. There's a lot of scrapes, he was stopping a lot of deer in the area. So I was just grunting as I was going, every so often and had him come back on the backtrack and killed that buck. It also works well to cover your sound. If the snow's crunchy, there's nothing you can do about it. So if you're going to hunt, you're going to be making noise, and the best thing that you can do is act like you're a deer. So a lot of times when you're crunching along, you can just be blowing that grunt call as you're going every so often and make yourself sound like another buck.
Yeah, I can grunt with my mouth and bleat with my mouth, that's usually what I do. But I do have one. I still got my original Night and Hail Easy Grunter or something from back in the 80s, and I throw it in my pack on the days that it's if we have the crunchy snow, because that's when I'll put it in my mouth and just walk along on the track with it. But if I'm just going to grunt a few times, I just do it with my mouth, or I bleat that way too. And they both work. I mean, I usually just look at the situation I'm in, because every situation's different when you jump one or before you jump one. And what I have noticed over the years with a grunt call is it more often will bring in the big ones, mature ones, or the yearlings. The ones in between, a lot of times, are leery of it because they've probably, they've had their ass kicked once or twice. So
Yeah,
they may not be as eager to come to the grunt, but they'll all come to a bleat. So I do that quite a bit.
Hal,
I shot one a couple years.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you to demonstrate those?
Yeah. So the way I do a bleat is probably it's similar. I mean, a bleat's a bleat. I mean, you can change it around, but probably everybody's heard those can calls.
Sure.
So I just imitate that kind of, and I might do some different ones, because I don't like to just do one thing all the time. But basically, it's just meh, like that. It sounds like a can call or whatever.
Sure.
And then my grunt is actually it's like a burp on command. Some people can do it, some can't, but I can. So you just grab your air and that's really all you need to do. You don't need to do any more than that, because there's no science to it. They all make different sounds and at different times. So if you just sound like a deer, they'll think you're a deer.
Yeah, and it's funny. I can make just an analogy real quick to elk hunting. When I first moved to Montana, I'd never hunted elk. I'd never used an elk call before, and I was practicing. And I watched a bunch of videos and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I sounded terrible." And then the first couple of bulls that I heard bugle, this sounded even worse than anything I can imagine. Like that doesn't sound like an elk at all. And they were just raspy or just real weird pitch. So after that, I quit worrying about it so much. I think it's more when you say it than what you say a lot of times.
100%. We talk about that a lot with the moose hunting, because the moose hunting is real vocal, back and forth, and everyone's got a different sound and a little bit different tone. And if you use it at the right time, they're coming.
Yeah. And exactly. If they're in the right mood too, I think like if you make anything that's even approximately close to what a deer or an elk sounds like, you're going to get them to come in.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, hey guys, want to just reiterate, really appreciate the time today. And if people want to check out more, they can go to bigwoodsbucks.com, check out the Facebook group or the YouTube channel. And then sounds like if you're interested in doing any moose, deer, or snowmobiling, check out Lake Parlin Lodge also.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah, we really appreciate it too, and appreciate you guys having us on. And one thing I did notice after we had Dan on our podcast is there's a lot of crossover between the two shows. We had a lot of love for Dan, and on our side, a lot of guys that follow him. But we really appreciate you guys having us on tonight.
Oh, it's been great.
Yeah.
And I think there's, for lack of a better word, there's some romanticism in the idea of tracking down a big woods deer. And I think a lot of our audience is from Michigan and Wisconsin, you know, so you've got northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin where that's a possibility. So yeah, definitely cool tactics.
Yeah. We've had a bunch of people from Michigan out here at the lodge in the fall, and Wisconsin too. I actually guided a guy for 3 or 4 years from Wisconsin, and then he showed up last year again because I don't guide anymore. When I turned 65, I said I'm just going to go on my own and take my grandson. So I'm not guiding. I let the younger guys do it. But
Sure.
yeah, people come from all over.
Well, all right, guys, that's going to do it. And last note from us, we usually do a show every Tuesday. I'm going to be tied up next Tuesday. So next week there will be no show. We will be back on the 21st. So hope to catch everybody then, the 21st, 7 p.m. Central. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks again to the Big Woods Bucks guys, and we'll catch everybody later. Bye.
Okay, we'll see you.